Something happened in the Middle East that most mainstream coverage glossed over, and the numbers involved are genuinely staggering. In the first week alone, after a major escalation between Iranian and U.S. forces, the cost of the conflict had already crossed $5 billion, not in territory lost, not in lives, but purely in hardware. Radar systems that took years to build, interceptor missiles that cost more than a luxury skyscraper, and capabilities that, once gone, won't be back for half a decade. Today we're breaking down exactly what was destroyed, what it's worth, and why it matters for how this conflict and future conflicts might unfold. Let's get into it. To understand the scale of what happened, you first need a bit of background. On February 28th, following U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, launched large-scale missile and drone attacks on military and strategic targets across the Middle East. This wasn't a symbolic response. This was a coordinated, high-intensity operation targeting some of the most expensive and operationally critical systems the U.S. military has deployed in the region. What made this particularly notable wasn't just the scale, it was the targeting logic. The IRGC didn't go after random installations. They went after the eyes and ears of American air defense, the radar systems that make everything else work. And in doing so, they appear to have forced a very costly and complicated situation for U.S. forces operating in the region. So let's talk about what they hit. The single most significant loss was the AN/FPS-132 radar. If you've never heard of it, that's understandable. It's not the kind of system that comes up in everyday conversation. But among defense analysts, it's considered one of the most important pieces of hardware the United States has deployed anywhere in the world. Here's what it does. The AN/FPS-132 is a long-range ballistic missile early warning radar. It can detect missile launches from up to 5,000 kilometers away. It can track hundreds of targets simultaneously. And it can provide precise trajectory predictions, meaning it tells missile defense operators exactly where an incoming missile is heading and when it's going to get there. That last part is crucial. Without reliable early warning data, missile defense systems operate with far less time and far less accuracy. You're essentially asking someone to catch a ball while blindfolded, compared to watching it leave the pitcher's hand. Each AN/FPS-132 is estimated to cost around $1 billion. There's only one stationed outside the United States, or rather there was, at a base in Qatar where it became operational in 2013. Its specific purpose was to monitor Iranian and Syrian ballistic missile capabilities. When it was destroyed on February 28th, U.S. sources acknowledged it degraded missile warning capabilities in the region. That's a significant admission. These systems are rare, they're extraordinarily expensive, and according to U.S. estimates, replacing the one that was lost will take somewhere between 5 and 8 years. The fact that the IRGC targeted it in the opening hours of the conflict tells you something important about their planning. Taking out early warning first is a classic force multiplier move, because every subsequent missile strike becomes harder to intercept when the defender's situational awareness has been degraded from the very start. Beyond the FPS-132, 2 additional high-value radar systems were also confirmed destroyed, both of them TPY-2 radars, which are the radar component of the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system. THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is the U.S. military's primary system for intercepting ballistic missiles at high altitude, and the AN/TPY-2 is what makes THAAD work. It's the system's eyes. Without it, THAAD can still theoretically fire interceptors, but only using data fed in from other external sensors, under specific conditions, and with substantially reduced effectiveness. One of the destroyed AN/TPY-2 radars was operated by U.S. Army forces at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. The other was operated by the United Arab Emirates Armed Forces. Now here's the part that puts this in perspective. There are an estimated only 15 AN/TPY-2 radars in existence worldwide. The vast majority are tied to THAAD batteries. Cost estimates for each one range from $550 million to around $1 billion, depending on configuration. Using a mid-range estimate of about $800 million per radar, losing 2 of them represents roughly $6 billion in radar capability alone. Add the download billion for the FPS-132, and you're already at approximately $2.7 billion in radar systems destroyed in the first week of hostilities. But the radar losses are only part of the financial picture. The other major cost driver is interceptor missiles, the actual rounds fired by systems like THAAD to shoot down incoming threats. To give you a reference point, there's useful data from an earlier, shorter period of hostilities between June 13th and 25th of 2025, 12 days during which THAAD systems expended over 150 interceptor missiles countering Iranian ballistic missile attacks. Each THAAD interceptor costs approximately $15.5 million. That 12-day expenditure alone came to an estimated $2.35 billion, and it depleted more than a quarter of the U.S. Army's global stockpile of THAAD interceptors. Let that sink in. 12 days of operations burned through 25% of the world's supply of one of America's most critical air defense missiles. Now, the period from February 28th involved a significantly higher intensity of strikes, with more interceptors pre-positioned in the region. While the exact numbers from that period aren't fully confirmed, even a conservative estimate, assuming similar expenditure rates to June, would bring the combined operational cost of THAAD interceptors and the destroyed radar systems to over $5 billion in less than a week. That's a conservative figure. The real number is likely higher. What does all of this actually mean strategically? A few things stand out. First, there's a structural vulnerability in Western air defense architecture that this conflict has exposed. Systems like THAAD rely on a single radar, one radar per battery. That means if that radar is destroyed, the entire battery's independent search and track capability is gone. You can still shoot, but you're shooting with borrowed eyes. Compare that to Russian systems like the S-400, which are typically deployed with multiple complementary radar types, sometimes up to half a dozen different systems working together. If one long-range radar is taken out, the others continue functioning. We've seen exactly this play out in the conflict in Ukraine, where Russian air defense systems have demonstrated a degree of resilience precisely because of that layered redundancy. This isn't a new criticism of THAAD. Defense analysts have raised it for years. But this conflict appears to have turned that theoretical vulnerability into a very real operational one. Second, there's the question of replenishment timelines. Replacing an AN/FPS 132 takes 5 to 8 years. The global stock of THAAD interceptors has been significantly depleted across 2 separate periods of hostilities. These aren't items you can quickly reorder. The industrial base, the manufacturing time, the testing and qualification process, all of it takes years. This matters not just for the Middle East, but for U.S. strategic posture globally. Resources committed and depleted here are resources unavailable elsewhere. What we're looking at in this conflict is essentially a case study in asymmetric cost imposition. Iran's missiles and drones, while certainly not cheap, cost a fraction of the interceptors used to stop them, and a fraction of the radar systems destroyed in the process. Offensive munitions are, almost universally, cheaper to produce than the defensive systems designed to stop them. And when you can take out the sensors that make those defensive systems work, as the IRGC appear to have done in the opening hours of this conflict, you compound the cost advantage even further. None of this is to make a political argument about who's right or wrong in this conflict. That's a different and deeply complex conversation. What this is an honest look at the financial and operational reality of what's been reported. The numbers, the systems, and the implications. $5 billion in less than a week. Radar systems that won't be replaced for years. Interceptor stockpiles that took decades to build, depleted in days. Whatever happens next in this conflict, those are the starting conditions, and understanding them clearly matters, regardless of where you stand on everything else. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown useful, consider sharing it with someone who'd want to understand what's actually happening beyond the headlines, and drop your thoughts in the comments. This is exactly the kind of topic worth having a serious conversation about.